Meal planning is important because it prevents us from being a disappointed wreck when dinner time comes around and we have no clue what to make, or even if we have the ingredients to make the meal. It's a time and a money saver, but most importantly, it frees up valuable brain space. Creating a meal plan prepares us for the week to come and gives us peace of mind that we're organized and can feed ourselves and our family. That's why I do it, and that's why Plan to Eat helps me do it. Your subscription includes access to the Plan to Eat website and fully featured mobile apps on iOS and Android. And Plan to Eat gives you the tools to clip and organize recipes from any website, the ones your family loves and that fit your dietary preferences and needs. And you can create a meal plan around your schedule. Then what happens is the Plan to Eat software automatically creates an organized shopping list based on your plan. So sign up for your free trial at plantoeat.com/timecrafting. That's plantoeat.com/timecrafting. The coupon will be automatically applied to your account and can be used when you're ready to subscribe. It's valid for new customers only. Give Plan to Eat a try today. I'm Mike Vardy, and this is the Productivityist Podcast. Welcome to the Productivityist Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Vardy, and this week on the show, a guest I've wanted to have on the show for a long time. Benjamin Hardy. He is the author of Willpower Doesn't Work, one of the most highly acclaimed Medium writers. And when I say Medium, he doesn't write in Medium. He writes on the platform Medium, which is a great platform. I actually write there as well. But Ben has really kind of made his home there. And this book is kind of, he's put it all out there. And this book, Willpower Doesn't Work, which is kind of interesting. We talk about like my affinity to the Green Lantern and whose strength is derived from willpower. We get right into that as why he believes willpower doesn't work and what does instead. We're going to dive into that. We're going to talk about agency. We talk a little bit about constraints, a whole bunch of different things. Addiction comes into play, lots of stuff. This is a fantastic conversation. I'm glad I can bring it to you. But I have to say that there are some hiccups during the Skype call. You'll hear some fluttering every once in a while. I just want to put that out there right up front. I don't think it detracts from the quality of the conversation, but there are a few times where there are some sputters, and I didn't want to cut those out. Didn't want John to cut those out either, because I felt that it would disrupt the flow of the conversation. So I hope you can get past some of the little technical things that went on during this conversation I had with Ben Hardy. And if you can, now it's time for the show. I'd like to welcome Benjamin Hardy to the Productivityist Podcast. Ben, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump right in, and I want to talk. Your book, Willpower Doesn't Work, is kind of the subject that I want to dive into right away. And I am sitting here in my office, and anyone who's listened to the show for a long period of time or followed my work knows that I have Green Lantern stuff all over the place. I'm wearing my Green Lantern ring. I'm drinking coffee out of my Green Lantern cup. I look to my right and I see all of the Green Lantern collectibles that I have. And then I, see you speak at, you're at Jeff Goins' Tribe Conference, and you were having a conversation with Jeff, and I'm like, I wonder what his book, what's Ben's book going to be about? And I look it up and I'm like, Willpower Doesn't Work. And it shatters my entire world of Green Lanternisms, because Green Lantern's power is derived from willpower. So I want to know, have I been following a false idol all of this time with the idea that I've got all this willpower stuff that's surrounding me, and now I'm hearing that it's not as much of a factor as I once thought. Could you share with am I going to be okay? Is the question.
I think you're going to be okay. A lot of people falsely attribute the cause of something. You know what I mean? So like in Western culture, willpower is a very sexy idea. We're a very individualistic culture. So we really like to think that we're the cause of everything we do. We like to think that if I become successful, for example, that it was all me. It was all my grit, my willpower, my domination, it's like, because we're so individualistic as a culture, and we're conditioned to think individualistically, in a lot of ways we ignore the surrounding context that actually influences and shapes everything. So there's two kind of fundamental frameworks here. There's one that's atomistic, where you're kind of focused on individual variables and you kind of pull them out of context and look at them. And then there's more of a holistic manner, where it recognizes kind of systematically that everything is influenced by what's around it. When you change a part, you change the whole. So like that's kind of high level, but basically what I'm saying here is that willpower obviously is a thing. The problem is that willpower is not necessarily an effective method for success in today's exponentially changing world. So like willpower, in my opinion, is a smart model to go off of if you were living like in a linear world that's not globalized and not filled with smartphones and filled with all sorts of things that are constantly at our fingertips. So one of the ways that people describe willpower, psychologists, one of the definitions of willpower is decision fatigue. And basically what it means is that the more decisions you make, the less quality those decisions become. And so it's why, there's popularized concepts and ideas like that, Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs and stuff wore the same clothes every day. Like if you look up decision fatigue, you're going to see a lot of research and ideas on people who try to reduce the amount of decisions they make so that they can actually make high quality choices. Well, so the problem with willpower nowadays is that we live in a world where there's literally endless choices to be made. Like by the time you open your smartphone, you've made tons of choices, and most people's willpower is out the wall. It's gone. It's one of the reasons why addiction is spiking. I mean, addiction rates are, and just distraction in general. If people had all the willpower they needed, then why are people struggling to stay focused at work? And so this book takes a lot more holistic perspective and says, what is it really that makes a person who they are, and what is it really that allows a person to be successful long term? Willpower is clearly a short term approach. So how can you actually make holistic transformation to who you are without trying to over focus on what you have to do?
Right.
Yeah.
So it's funny because as I was listening, I'm on a plane listening to you tell me about why willpower doesn't work, because I have the audiobook. And I'm realizing that all of this Green Lantern stuff I have around me is really just an avatar. It's an environmental kind of shift or change. It creates this environment of, hey, don't forget what you really need to be working on. Don't forget what you're, like it's almost like that reminder. And
They're
you talk,
triggers. You've got a bunch of triggers in your environment.
Yeah. And you talk about that in the book. You talk about environmental changes are one of the, if not, I'll let you speak to this, if not the most valuable thing you can do to kind of move, make things happen the way that you want to happen, or move forward in a way that willpower just can't do on a sustainable level. Let's talk a little bit about the environmental things that we can do, because I think that that's something that people, they get caught up in just the doing of things, that they don't think about how can I set myself up for success or set myself up for long-term achievement through just changing either the place that I'm doing the things in or the state of mind that I'm approaching things with. Can we talk a little bit about that as well?
100%. Yeah. So there's two very important concepts to go into before I dive into this. Number one is that, so there's a quote by Zig Ziglar. He says that your inputs shape your outputs, and obviously your outputs shape your success. So like your inputs are like what's coming in. So like an input could be like the food you eat, or the information you consume, or the music you're listening to, or the friends you're around. Like those things become inputs. They come into you, and those inputs shape your outputs. They shape, your identity and your worldview and stuff. And so like the inputs that a person has are very influenced by the society that they're a part of, based on the friend groups that they're part of, based on their interests, obviously. But like your inputs are very important. But another important component is the idea that who you are in one situation and what your possibilities are in that situation are very different than who you are and what your possibilities are in a different situation. So I'll just give an example. One of the reasons I wrote this book is because my wife and I were foster parents of 3 kids for 3.5 years. We actually adopted those kids. But when we got these kids and they were aged 3, 5, and 7, they had so many problems, as you could probably imagine. Like they had been taken away from their parents' house. Their parents lost their rights. Their parents didn't make the kids go to school. That's one of the reasons they got taken away from their parents. There were five kids and two adults living in a one bedroom small like hut, basically, with mountains of clothes and garbage and trash in there, bugs flying around. And basically all the kids slept on the same bed, and the parents just let the kids stare in front of a TV all day. And in order to put the kids to bed, they gave the kids cough syrup to make sure that the kids would go to sleep. Um, and so these kids, when we got them, they had like no capability to even put themselves to sleep. We had to like literally work with and train these kids to go to bed for 6 months. And we're still sometimes dealing with that. But basically, here's kind of an important approach for people to think about. When we got these kids, we immediately put them into Montessori school, which is a private school. Well, it wasn't actually immediate. We had them in public school for a while and realized that just given their situation, their background, they literally couldn't comprehend it. And so they needed to be in an atmosphere and in an environment that allowed them more freedom and also more hands-on help. So we got them into Montessori school, which is an incredible school program. We got them into extracurricular activities. We got them extra tutoring because the 7-year-old kid literally had no reading skills. When we got him, he was like it was as if he was in kindergarten, like intellectually, and he was supposed to be in second or third grade, like maybe even not even kindergarten. So he had to get tons of extra tutoring. We got these kids into sports. We've traveled, most of the country with these kids on multiple occasions. And there's lots of research. There's tons of research, which I detail in the book, but basically it talks about how, especially for kids, who you are is shaped in a lot of ways based on like the environment, based on the neighborhood you grew up in, based on the influences around you. And so one of the things I just want people to think about is, do these three kids have the same opportunities and options in their old house as they do in our house? That's just an important question to consider. I would say no. I would say with their parents who were totally high and on drugs and neglectful and not taking them to school, these kids did not have the same options as they have in our house. And if you don't have options, you can't make choices. And so the notion of free will is what I present in the book as an idea called contextual agency. So basically, you can make choices based on your context. One just quick example, and then I'll go into how do you shape the context, is think about women in society, for example. Like women, over the last, several decades have gotten increasing freedoms in society. Like women at this point, like if you were just to take a snapshot of women versus men in society right now, women are crushing it in academics, in higher ed, and in just undergrad. Women are becoming increasingly successful in all areas of business, things like that. If you were to compare women right now versus women 150 years ago, it would be a very different story. What's the difference? Do women have more willpower today than they had, 150 years ago, or is the context different? Do they have more options? It's just a different environment. And so when you have different options, you can make different choices. And so now the question becomes, what do you focus on? Do you focus on just increasing your energy and your output in a certain environment where maybe the gains can be small and linear? Or do you focus on the context and about the possibilities within that context? My opinion is, and it's kind of the premise of the book, is that you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck if you focus on shifting context and then adapting to context rather than staying in the same environment, potentially with very limited options and trying to grit your way through, potentially not even a lot of opportunity. It's just an easy comparison of my foster kids versus coming into our house. And so how do you shape that environment? I go through a lot of different recommendations in the book. I talk about two types of optimal environments. I may go into that later because that's, again, more like high level. But one of the best ways that I have found to get myself into very high level environments where, so there's this whole idea, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So the people you surround yourself with, really your environment in general creates you as a person. And so if you want to become something specific, let's just say you want to become a millionaire, you could obviously spend 10 years, gritting your way to finally making your way to that point, or you could figure out a way to get yourself in those types of environments where that type of thinking is the norm. because people adapt to norms. People actually act based on social norms more than they act based on their true values. And a good example of that is just obesity. Like most people probably value being healthy. They want to be healthy, but the majority of America is becoming obese, not because of values, but because of social norms and because of food options and stuff like that. So how I've seen a lot of people, like I did a lot of research during my PhD on what's the difference between real entrepreneurs and wannabe entrepreneurs.
Right.
And the fundamental shift is actually when people start investing money. When people start investing money into their dreams and into their goals, all of a sudden they become way more committed, and it also changes their proximity. So like when I became a successful writer, I started blogging in 2015. I made a few key investments that allowed me to get access to key mentors. Like one of them was as simple as paying $250 to Jeff Goins. So Jeff Goins is a popular blogger. He's actually the person that you referenced.
Yep.
I reached out to Jeff because he was doing a promotion. He was selling 20 copies of his book, The Art of Work. And if someone bought 20 copies, he said he would jump on the phone with him for 30 minutes and talk about whatever they wanted. Well, at that point, I had like 5 to 10,000 email subscribers to my blog, and I was just getting started, and I really wanted to write a book. And it was actually like probably 5 to 6 months after I started writing online, and I wanted to write a book and get a book deal. Well, I invested $250 in order to get access to a different vantage point, to someone. So I brought someone into my environment. I purposefully brought the Jeff Goins effect into my environment, and I was able to ask him questions. And he told me that I absolutely shouldn't seek a book deal right now. He said, you should wait a year. Wait until you have like 100,000 email subscribers and you'll get a 10 times bigger book advance. And that will change the trajectory of your career. Now, if I hadn't paid the $200 and if I hadn't asked him those specific questions, it might have taken me a year to get that information. I might have never gotten that information. I might have just tried to find a way to get a book deal. So that's just one key example and obviously, that's not like changing your house and putting pictures of the Green Lantern around your house. I mean, I think that's a very effective model. That's a different perspective as well.
Sure.
I mean, obviously you want to shape, but I'm just talking about like, how do you create opportunities to get around your mentors or to, that's one way. It's just investing. And I actually go very high into that concept in the book about mentorships and masterminds. But when it comes to just shaping your home environment or shaping a work environment, ultimately what I go into in the book is what I call forcing functions. And obviously what you've talked about with the Green Lantern is just putting triggers all around you. And by the way, I love that. There's a group called Gaping Void. Have you ever heard of Hugh MacLeod?
Oh yeah, I've got Ignore Everybody. I've got his book sitting right over here on my bookshelf. Yep.
So he actually, Gaping Void has, which was his blog, actually became now a culture design company. Mm-hmm. And Hugh actually draws amazing pictures. And they, so basically what they do is this culture design company is they have what are called culture walls. And so what they do is they ask people questions and they basically help people develop a belief system. And then they turn that belief system into art. And the art is drawn by Hugh. And then there's key statements. And then you end up having like these 1 foot by 1 foot tiles of art with key statements. And then you have this beautiful art all over your wall, or in your office. And the purpose of that is similar to your Green Lantern stuff. It's supposed to trigger desired behavior. It's supposed to trigger desired mindset, belief systems and stuff. But I have all sorts of cool art, like one of them says you make or break your life before 8 a.m. or do what is right, let the consequence follow. Like I have all of these things that are part of my belief system sitting all around me, continually triggering me. And so that is a genius way to shape behavior or to shape environment in order to shape desired psychology and stuff.
And I think what what that does is the person that comes up with that stuff is you previously, when you were at your best, when you were kind of in those moments of, and it's funny because I was reading an article before the interview today. Peter Bregman had an article in HBR about how do you actually start the task you've been avoiding. I'll link to it in the show notes. But he said start with willpower, but he said it only because it's not in a moment it could be really, really helpful, but it's not sustainable over the long haul. So but what you can do is, at least I found this for myself, is like those, like you said, and having those triggers, whether it's art or quotes, or I mean, having a desktop quote. I surround my stuff with a lot of stuff that I do as well. Same thing with having a theme for my day. Like I theme my day. So when I came up with those themes for that particular time period, whether it's a day, a chunk of time, a month, whatever, that was me, 2-3 weeks, months, whatever ago. I can trust that person because that person had my best intentions in mind. And it said, if you do this, then you will be able to move forward with the things you ultimately want to do, instead of getting pulled into, a direction that you don't necessarily want to go in over the long term. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. It sounds
I think
like
everybody has their own. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. I mean, obviously everyone has their own perspectives and approaches, and this is a complex conversation. But like, it sounds like what you're saying is make one decision that makes all the rest of your decisions easier.
Right. Which you talked about decision fatigue initially, and the idea of overchoice and all that stuff. I think that it's interesting because when I was looking at some of the research around willpower before talking to you, because you've probably have you heard of Dr. Carl Eric Fisher, the psychiatry professor at Columbia, where he basically saying willpower is a full on myth, and he's talking about moral overtones and all that stuff, and I think that. The interesting thing about that is that when, like you said, when you rely solely on willpower, it's not something that can be sustained over the long term. And not only that, like you said about diet and stuff like that, people tend to, New Year's resolutions are a great example about that too, right? Wouldn't it be like having willpower just to live up to those resolutions that you set out on January 1st? The idea that you're going to be able to rely on willpower to carry you through to December 31st is not wise, right?
Yeah, it clearly doesn't work. Most people, the reason it doesn't work is obvious, is because most people are trying to gut their way through it. So 8% of people apparently achieve their New Year's resolutions. I don't even know. I
was gonna say apparently probably sounded like you meant to say allegedly.
Yeah, but I don't even think it's that high.
No, I agree.
I think that most people are stuck.
Yeah.
But one of the key topics that I dig into in this book is addiction.
Yeah.
And there is so much research on addiction at this point that says you cannot overcome an addiction through willpower. In fact, willpower can often make the problem worse, because willpower is a very isolated approach. It's trying to do it by yourself. It's a very individualistic thing. Willpower. So what they say, so there's a really good TED Talk. It's called "Everything You Know About Addiction Is Wrong," or "Everything You Think You Know About Addiction Is Wrong." And he talks a lot about how addiction is an environmental adaptation. He cites a bunch of research. One of the studies that he talked about is interestingly, in Vietnam, during the Vietnam War, like an enormous percentage of our American troops, when they were over there, they were addicted to heroin. It was just kind of like they got easy access to it or something. It was a way to like numb themselves to the pain and the pressure of being away from home and killing people and all the fear involved. And so a ton of these people were addicted to heroin when they were over there. And the U.S. got wind of it, the government, and we're afraid that, we were going to bring back all these, tens of thousands of people, and we're going to have all these heroin addicts. But the thing that surprised everyone is that's not what happened. Like when these people came back to their homes and to their lives and stuff, I think only 5% of the people had problems with heroin. And that's because who they were in that context is not the same person as they were when they came home and when they had jobs and wives and kids and lives. It wasn't even an option. Again, right. Context shaped the possibility. But one of the important things that is said in that TED Talk is that the opposite of addiction is connection. Like the only way to actually overcome an addiction is through vulnerability, through trust, through having a community, through forgiveness, through all sorts of stuff. You can't do it on your own. You can't. Addiction is a very isolated activity. It's a very isolated behavior. And addiction in a lot of ways is the product of trauma. And trauma is really important as it relates to addiction, because a traumatic experience is stored in a person's memory very differently than a regular memory. Regular memories are things that we should be able to, when we recall them in social situations and stuff, we actually recreate memories. So like when you recall a memory, you recreate it and you reassociate it with new things. So healthy memories are very fluid. They're fluid, they're contextual, you can change them. The problem with traumatic memories is that they're fixed, they're unalterable, and they're also isolated from context. And so they're just kind of this fixed thing that keeps people stuck. It keeps people stuck and unable to experience present moments, because they're living in the past and they can't take in present moments, allow those present moments to reshape their memories in their past. And so traumatic memories keep people stuck. Another word for it is suppressed trauma or suppressed emotion. And and so that's why people turn to addiction, is because, they don't know how to deal with the pain. They don't want to deal and they don't understand how to deal with the trauma. And so they numb themselves. It ends up being a solution to their problems, but addiction in general is an isolated activity. It's something that's secretive. And Joe Polish, who is the owner of Genius Network, he's one of my mentors. He's an addictions expert. He was himself a heavy addict. One of the things he always says is that you are as sick as your secrets. And addiction is a very secretive act. It's isolated. And so you can't get out of it through isolating yourself. And willpower is an attempt to do it by yourself. It's an attempt to fight a silent battle rather than just to seek help and to seek an environment in a context where you can get support. Willpower is like trying to swim upstream. Versus just seeking help, and like ultimately getting yourself in like a river or whatever, going the way you want to go. And so the opposite of addiction is connection. And kind of how I've framed things is the opposite of willpower is also connection. Like the opposite of willpower is actually seeking collaboration. And it's actually seeking, it's focused on creating a context and an environment that includes people that then you work with, whether that's overcoming an addiction or solving a problem or achieving goals. It's just recognizing that you can obviously do enormously more with the right supportive cast than you could do on your own. So yeah, those are some thoughts.
No, that's
one of the reasons I wrote. It's just because addiction is such a big topic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you're going to talk about behavior change, why don't you just focus on one of the biggest issues, right? We're all addicted to some stuff.
So I want to shift gears a little bit now and jump back to, so we were talking about Human Cloud a little bit earlier and Gaping Void. And of course, anyone who's followed his stuff knows that he kind of got started by doing his art on the back of business cards. Like that's kind of the size that he used when he was starting. And I want to talk about constraints and how can constraints help, when it comes to, I mean, you've been writing consistently on Medium for quite some time. Do you use constraints? Do you believe that constraints can be really, really helpful? Is there something that people can do with constraints that will help them that in a way that willpower just can't?
Well, I mean, the answer is yes, obviously. And the truth is that all of us have constraints. Like, the thing is it's about choosing the right constraints. And in my book, I actually call those forcing functions.
Yeah.
But, for example, so constraints are obviously essential. If you try to be devoid of constraint, then you end up, in no man's land. And that's where the willpower approach doesn't work, is because, again, we were already talking about make one choice that makes all other choices irrelevant. Right. And I'll just give a quick example. Like, I was recently at Costco and excuse me, and I wanted to get like these delicious sorbet things that I just think are delicious. And my wife said, if you buy those, you already know you're going to eat them. And I know that you actually don't really want to eat those because they conflict with your goal. Like obviously you enjoy them, right? But that's where internal conflict comes in. And generally you're not going to experience willpower unless there's some form of internal conflict, right? You want to eat the cookie, but you also want to like be fit. You want to be distracted on YouTube, but you also want to write that article. Like if willpower exists, there's conflict, either between yourself and yourself or between yourself and your environment. And, So in this case, I just made the one decision, and I don't necessarily think it took willpower, because like once I came to my senses for a single moment, I said, and like by making that one decision, I didn't have to think about it again. Like once I got home, I didn't bring those things into my environment, and therefore I didn't have to think about it, agonize over it, and make decisions about when and when I could not eat them. Like I just made the decision once. I'm not going to eat it. So that's kind of a concept of constraint. But when it comes to kind of creativity, like you're talking about, I mean, I think we all come up with our own rules and strategies. There's a lot of research that talks about how your brain is most creative and effective first thing in the morning. So for me, when it comes to constraints, like I just purposely choose to stay away from my cell phone and away from mostly the internet, except for research, until like 10 or 11 in the morning. Like so I wake up early, and for me, morning time is all about learning, and it's all about creating. It's not about drifting into the confusion and madness of social media and stuff like that. So one constraint is just I don't look at, I don't even go near my phone before like 10 a.m. I don't schedule meetings before noon, because meetings, or even stuff like this podcast, like, I love doing stuff like this, but if it's gonna get in the way of like my writing or my creating, then it's gonna totally ruin my whole day.
Mm-hmm.
And then just at the end of the day, like creating hard boundaries for my kids, like, after this podcast, I'm done. Like my kids are going to get home from school, and like I don't work. And I know that if I have my phone on my body, even when I'm with my kids trying to be present, that I'm going to subconsciously start picking it up again, because there are habitual addictions. Basically what happens is that you start to, you adapt to your environment, and then you subconsciously, you're acting almost entirely subconsciously. So even if I have all the intentions in the world to be present with my kids, if I keep my cell phone with me, people are going to be texting me. People are going to be emailing me. People are going to be calling me. I'm just going to subconsciously just open up Twitter. And so one of the constraints is just, and it comes from a philosophy: wherever you are, that's where you should be.
Right.
Yeah. Or wherever you are, be there. I mean, that's Jim Rohn, but also Dan Sullivan said it. And so, I put all sorts of constraints in place to allow myself to be the person I want to be, to be able to create what I want to create, to be able to do what I want to do. To be able to be the writer, the husband, father, the person I want to be. I mean, you have to create the constraints, or else, basically what the research says is that basically if you rely on willpower, your performance, I guarantee, is way less than you think it is. Willpower is ridiculous. And the more and more you go into it, I mean, at least for myself, obviously I'm heavily biased, but what the research says is that people actually look at their cell phones 2 or 3 times as much as they think they do.
Mm-hmm.
And so like most people's behavior is unconscious. And if you're holding your cell phone on your body and you're trying to be present with your kids, you probably actually think you're doing better than you really are. Like you're probably actually way more distracted and less present than you really are. And you may pat yourself on the back and you may say, wow, I exhibited a lot of willpower. I only looked at my phone 4 times, when in reality, you actually probably looked at it 15 times. You just weren't aware. And so like, it's just the same with eating, or watching TV or staring at your screen. Like if you're relying on willpower, you're actually performing generally far worse than you think you are.
Right. Yeah. We talk about constraints and this idea that they seem, at least, without looking at them, they seem to be restrictive, but they actually can create more freedom. I mean, you talked about Costco. I used to work at Costco. I worked at Costco for over a decade. And one of the things that Costco love to do is they have far less items available, which creates the ability for people to have less decision-making involved when they go to purchase something. I use this analogy a lot. You go into Costco, you're going to buy ketchup. You're going to buy Heinz ketchup. It's the only kind they sell. Are you going to buy the 3-pack of massive ketchup, the big tin of ketchup, or the restaurant packs of ketchup? Those are your choices. Otherwise, you don't buy ketchup, right? So that frees you up to buy like the sorbet. Like it puts people in the position to go, oh, look, here's this wonderful thing that I have never seen anywhere else. Maybe I will buy that because I'm not caught up in the ketchup aisle looking at the 14 different types of ketchup. I could look at different brands, different prices, all that stuff. So constraints can actually I mean, what you've done and what, what we talk when you're talking about forcing functions and constraints is this idea that, like when I'm done, like you and I are talking right now, Wednesday is the day I record podcast interviews. Very rarely do I make an exception to that. And I do that only when the guests can kind of say, hey, look, I can't make it work. But when I'm done, I'm doing the same thing you are. Going to see my son's in a talent show. I'm going to go do that. And that's the end of it. Like that is the end of the day. Now I'm more of a night owl than a morning person. So I'll go back to work after the kids are in bed for a couple of hours, but that's the boundaries that I've set. And I think people get caught up in this idea that they have less freedom to make those choices than they believe they do. And that is fascinating to me when people, there's these biases that they have in place that they just, well, I can't do that because what if someone's trying to reach me? Or what if I miss, like they've got this fear of missing out complex. And I think that's a fallacy.
Yeah. Yeah, it is 100%.
So before we wrap up, I want to talk about journaling because you've got an article here. I'm going to link to it about writing in your journal. How long have you had this practice of writing in your journal? When do you do it? I think it's an undervalued skills, but an undervalued task or undervalued action that you could do every day that's going to help you move forward and basically develop yourself as a better in so many different ways. When do you write in it? How do you do it? Like, when did you start? I'd love to get some thoughts on that before we wrap up.
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you. So, I mean, I have literally around my body, like I've got about 15 journals around me, and only I think 3 or 4 of them are filled out, but I'm a collector of journals. So I've been journaling consistently, heavily for 10 years now.
Wow.
It's actually been a little over 10 years, but it was almost exactly 10 years to the day that I read an article. So I was serving a humanitarian mission, and I came across this article written by this lady, and basically she detailed some of the benefits that she had experienced journaling over the last 30 years. And it just hit me, like something hit me in that moment. It was either a spiritual experience, I don't know what it was, something. But I just kind of realized that this was something I needed to do. I needed to learn how to do, and I needed to commit to doing. And like from that day forward, at least on my mission, which, it was a 2-year experience, and, I was only a few months in. So from that day forward, I never stopped. I never missed a point actually where I was journaling, hour to 2 or 3 hours a day, like during lunch breaks and just during like break times and stuff. And it was during my journaling, and I didn't have a lot of strategy around it back then. Like I would just jump in and I'd start writing about kind of the wild experiences I was having and the things I was learning. And I found it to be a very therapeutic process, but also a very spiritual and creative process as well. Like I got to the point where I could learn, like where all of a sudden I would open up and I'd start writing. And all of a sudden, like it felt like the writing kind of took over me. And like I would just learn how to I would just write in a stream of consciousness way. I wasn't thinking about what I was saying. It was just flowing out of me faster and faster and faster. And I was getting a ton of insights and ideas out of my journaling. I was learning. I was connecting ideas. I was, feeling high on life, and I was just blown away by the experience. And also, I was learning through my journal how to consciously design my life and design specific experiences. Like I would think about, like, let's just say people we were teaching out in the missionary world, and like I would think about those people, and I would create experiences, and then I'd watch those experiences actually tangibly unfold. And I've since kind of, learned a lot more about personal development, psychology, goal setting, creativity, all these things. And I've learned how to use my journal as a tool for self-discovery, for self-healing, for creativity. All of my articles are generally framed first in my journal that I write, and then I go off and kind of reshape them and form them. But even very specific events, like such as last year, I was one of the speakers at Genius Network, which is a big annual conference, where like Tony Robbins, Peter Diamandis, like a lot of the best speakers and entrepreneurs in the world speak there. And I wrote in my journal months before that I would be a speaker at that event. And I had a very hot, a why for doing it. This book, Willpower Doesn't Work, I had some advanced copies and I wanted to get those copies out to everyone there. And so I thought that was the best way to do it. And there's an idea, in kind of old school self-improvement, but it's based on psychology, called autosuggestion. Basically, it's the idea that, when you, in a lot of ways, it's what affirmation and those things are based on. But when you can visually create an experience and you can actually tangibly believe it, and you just create elements of it. And then your subconscious mind will create connections, allowing you insights, which will allow you to figure out how to do it. And obviously, there's a lot more there. Memory and creativity are very connected to the subconscious mind, and I won't go into that right now. But ultimately, when do I do it? Where do I do it? Stuff like that. I journal throughout the day. I think it's very effective to journal first thing in the morning, and I typically try to journal in specific places. Kind of like you. You're in an environment that triggers you to have more willpower. I specifically seek environments that trigger creativity or trigger inspiration, insight. And often that requires me to leave my house. It requires me to leave my home environment to go to places that allow me a little bit more clarity, whether that be, out in nature or just, it doesn't have to be anything extreme, but, just being mindful. Mindfulness, by the way, by definition, is awareness of context and awareness of how, an awareness of how that context changes over time. And so just being aware of how your environment influences you, and then journaling in specific places and times.
Ben, this has been great. And, I'd love to have you back on again in the future, because there's a lot of stuff we just barely scratched the surface on, but I know we could have a lot more to talk about. But we're at the end of the show here now. I encourage people strongly to go and pick up your book, Willpower Doesn't Work, Discover the Hidden Keys to Success. I'll have a link, the Amazon link in the show notes, of course. And I listened to the Audible version. I thought it was great. You actually read the Audible version, so if you could hear it right from the author. Ben, where else can people find you other than Medium, which of course I'll link to in the show notes as well? Yeah,
just benjaminhardy.com, which is a very basic site with some of my links on my Medium articles. But yeah, medium.com is where you'll find, my work, benjaminhardy.com.
Awesome. Benjamin, thanks so much for joining me today on the Productivityist podcast.
Awesome, man. Thanks.
Big thanks to Benjamin Hardy for joining me this week on the show. Everything we talked about, all the relevant links and everything are in the show notes. Quite a few for this episode for sure. Pick up his book, Willpower Doesn't Work. You can pick it up using the link in the show notes or wherever books are sold. Big thanks to John Polster for producing the show today. Big thanks to Anne for helping me go through all of the materials to get the show ready. And thanks to you for listening. And thanks to my supporters who have been supporting me as patrons over the years. Now, of course, we are shifting into a new way, a new model, a new kind of support system for productivities. It's not so much a support system for productivities, but it's a support system for anyone who wants to learn more about how to craft their time. So head over to productivityist.com/membership if you want to learn more about that. For now, I'm going to let you go. Thanks so much for enjoying the show. I'm really excited to see that we are now past the 200 episode mark. A lot of great guests coming. I can't wait to share them with you. I hope you'll stick around, give a rating, give a review, subscribe to the show. I'll hope to see you next week. This is Mike Barty, the host of the Productivityist podcast, reminding you to stop guessing and start going.